Hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming to meet us here and Saturday morning at the museum lecture. We're very impressed that this many people showed up with smiling faces and with lots of expectations, and we're very nervous. So obviously I'm Hitomi Iwasaki, and then this is my colleague Prerana Reddy.
Hello.
Microphone? Better have microphone? Yes. Okay. Yes. So before we start, I want to make sure that everybody feel comfortable, and this is going to be casual and open. And the important thing is we have a lot of information going back and forth. We tell you something, we can tell you, but please feel free to interrupt us at any point and ask questions. We have just about 2 hours, so that's a lot of time. So let's maximize this time and have a lot of communication, and we should learn from each other. So before we start, I just wanted to do the formal thanking to the Contemporary Art Foundation, who made us come over here, invited us to speak about our museum, and also this time we're receiving 2 full-time interns to the museum for 6 months, and we're very excited to work with young aspiring professional. And I do understand that a museum culture here in New York is very different. And I'm sure there's a lot of mutual learning between 2 interns and us as well. And this also coincides with having guest curator from Taipei. Some of them may know Maya Chen, the independent curator, who's going to be with us for the next 6 months. On and off, that she's coming twice to the Queen's Museum, and then all other time we'll be on Skype, glued to each other to co-curate exhibition. That is going to be part of the presentation and explain why Maya, someone like Maya, will be meaningful to come join us to do this exhibition. So thanking this foundation, especially thanking goes to Chairman Wonjia Ye, Mr. Wonjia Ye, and our special thanks of initiating this communication and making this arrangement to happen goes to Shini Chen, that I always call her Jenna. Thank you very much for a long negotiation and arrangement. Also, my thanking goes to Shini Wu. Thank you very much for happening everything very smoothly, and hope we do a good job here. Okay, so we start from Prerana. And again, if you have burning questions, you're welcome to interrupt us.
I also want to say that the format is maybe slightly different than was advertised. It's supposed to be 2 presentations, Hitomi going first and me going second, but kind of to indicate the fact that we actually work quite dialogically, we've combined our presentations into one, and we're going to, what we call tag team, go back and forth. So that way you don't get bored with just listening to one person and then the other person. And also you get a sense of how both of our works inform each other. And I think for us, as was introduced, our local situation and context is very important. So the first thing that I'm going to do is talk about the physical context, where it is, the geographical context, as well as the socioeconomic and demographical information of who lives there in that area, as well as the history of our building, because it has quite a lot of history, an important history for New York City that you'll see come up again as we talk about exhibitions and programming as something that we play with. Okay, I'll try not to be too repetitive, but there seems to be a good number of people who might not be that familiar with the geography. So this is the subway map of New York City, which will probably be the map that most people will encounter when they visit. And you can see on the left side is Manhattan, the long, narrow area, and the green square in between. You want to point? Yeah. I have my lovely assistant pointing for me. So the green blob in Manhattan, Yes, that's Central Park, just so that you have a landmark. And then you see the purple line, which is number 7 train, which we call the International Express, because every stop along the way, it's like being in another country. And that's Grand Central, Times Square, and then moving into Queens. And that green kind of area where it ends is called Flushing Meadows Current Park, which is one of the largest and most active parks. It's the largest park in Queens. And that is where we are located, inside the park. And the end of that 7 train line is the neighborhood that was mentioned before, Flushing, which is the largest Chinatown, quote unquote, even though it contains people who are not just from mainland China, but actually there's a large Taiwanese community, Korean community, as well as other Asian, including Indians and Afghans and other mixed Asian. So, New York has 5 what we call boroughs. Queens is one, Manhattan is one. Underneath Queens is Brooklyn, where she's pointing to. You want to point to Williamsburg, which is the other place, if you might have heard, is a art neighborhood. And way up north is the Bronx, or what we known as famous for the birthplace of hip hop. And each of these boroughs are quite large. So Queens has 3.1 million people, just Queens by itself. Staten Island is not on the map because it's not on the subway. And also says something about the centrality. So while we're in New York City, which is the cultural capital, we're on the periphery, conceptually, in terms of the cities. And I think that's an important thing to mention. So as you can see, the density of subways are all in Manhattan, and once you get out to us, there's only 1 train line. So if you make a mental trip in your mind from the middle of Times Square with all the lights and all the concentration, and you're going out to immigrant communities further and further away, and in 45 minutes train from downtown, then you will end up in Flushing Meadows Park, where we are located in the middle of the park. And in that territory, this is an actual map that indicates the number of foreign-born. And the darker the color, the more the population was born in another country and now living there. And you can see the northern part of Queens, where we are, is an area where that has the highest concentration of these foreign-born population. So there's 138, I believe, languages spoken in Queens, which I think makes it the most linguistically diverse places in the world, which is such an amazing thing because we have to draw from all of these different cultures, all of these different artistic traditions, but also makes it very difficult in terms of communication. We try and have a lot of languages that we speak amongst the staff, especially in the last 10 years, but it is impossible. We are not going to have 138 languages. But I think we can take as a challenge somehow to reflect this diversity, to make some choices based on our capacity, as well as looking even closely at the regions around, and say that we will try and reflect, respect, and engage with that diversity. We are not going to assume that the art history that we know, the artists that are known, necessarily reflect everything that exists in our communities. Because among those immigrants are also artists that are coming, and maybe they're not connected to the mainstream art institutions yet. And we have this opportunity to discover them. Things before I move that. The other part of that is to say that new immigrants, sometimes they don't know the political system, how their concerns, their issues are not being represented necessarily by the city. Maybe because of language, maybe because they come from places in which the government is something suspicious or negative. And therefore, sometimes there's an invisibility, and we have this opportunity as a public institution to communicate, to make that communication, and to make this connection, and to make our role as a public institution as one of bridging between the needs and the issues of these new arrivals, these new New Yorkers to the city, and the system itself that we are part of, but not completely controlled by either. We're not a bureaucratic institution, but we are a public institution. And I want to explain a little bit about the structure of the museum because I believe it might be quite different than in museums here, and it's actually quite different than in museums in the United States as well. So there's the executive director, Tom Finkelpearl, who's visited Taiwan many times, and before he was the director of the Queen's Museum, used to run the what we call the 1% for Art program, in which 1% of any city building project is devoted to putting art in there. And he was in charge of that process for the city, and so was already very interested in the relationship between public and art. And then he joined the museum 10 years ago. And since then, a lot of the changes that we are talking about have been implemented, even though some of the seeds of there might have been before. But I think through his leadership, the potential of what you're talking about is coming into effect. And so besides the director, there's no vice director, there's no other bureaucracy. And then there's 3 programmatic departments. So there's the exhibitions department, which might be somewhat understandable, that Hitomi is the director of, that is in charge of exhibition making. There's the education department, which in addition to doing tours and working with schools and things that you might think are usual, they have in recent years started a program specifically for New Yorkers, adult education, not children's education, but adult education in other languages. And it's a relationship with the public library system where they start classes in the public libraries and move to the museum. And these are classes that are often skills-based. These are things, skills like computer, web design, graphic design, that oftentimes people are charged for, and this is for free, and in their own languages, run by teaching artists themselves who speak those languages. So we connect the desire for particular skills and connect them to the artists.
Now, before Prerana started talking about public events, which is her department, I just wanted to give a little sort of overview, structural point we're making here, is that you would think that exhibition department, curatorial department, would be the department to represent museum's character, yes? And yes, that has been a model, and exhibition is the face of the institution. Without exhibitions, art museum doesn't exist. Of course, I am speaking this way without, skipping the notion of museum. Idea of museum exists based on the idea of a collecting institution with a collection. And we do have a collections, but we represent ourselves with more to do with temporary exhibitions we organize and present. Now, even so, there's a hierarchical notion of exhibitions department being a face of the museum, and then education and public events are to follow what we do to support exhibition program. It's changing. It's not exactly so anymore. And that's the whole point of this presentation actually taking place, although we don't have education representative here, but largely with Prerana, who is the director of public events, makes sense right here. So I just wanted to put that base concept clear, because we have a lot of details.
And public events, normally public events and education are one department in the United States. It's just called public programming. And one thing that's different about us is that public events has been created as a new department, actually. I was the second hire.
Because sometimes it was part of the education department.
And the reason we separated out is that we wanted to be able to hire people with different backgrounds that didn't fit the existing hierarchy and structure. So the first person that was hired was actually a native of a neighborhood that we are in Prerana, and who was herself an immigrant, born in India, came to the United States, was an artist and an organizer within the South Asian community. And Tom got to know her actually as artist first, and then through conversation, they made this idea, and she was the first hire, and then I was hired second. So she, as an artist, became the head of a new department, Then she hired myself. We had worked together in an organization called the South Asian Women's Creative Collective. And my background is actually working with an Sub-Saharan African Film Festival on one side, a Middle East cultural organization on the other side. And I did activism post-9/11, the terrorist attacks. There was a lot of violence and hatred towards people from South Asia and the Middle East. And so I was part of many coalitions dealing with those types of issues. People who are being detained, deported, disappeared from their communities. And so I had also some of these connections with those communities of Muslims and people who look like Muslims. And so we do traditional programming that does support exhibitions, but we also have 2 community organizers in addition to myself whose job it is to be in the community, visiting different organizations, different ethnic organizations, political organizations, social service organizations, political officials, so forth, and figuring out what are the issues in the communities, what are the problems in the communities, as well as what did they want from the museum. How can we provide space, a platform for their own cultural production as well. And it's not necessarily an easy thing that people understand what is contemporary art, what are art institutions. These are not traditionally museum-going audiences who live near us. And so part of it is being able to speak their language, feel part of their own neighborhood, not just to say, we're doing this great stuff, you should come, but also to have a dialogical process to challenge them about what they think about art and for them to challenge us and to negotiate what we do, what kinds of artistic productions and programming we do, but also challenge their own notions, which sometimes can be folkloric or very specific to their own ethnicity, and challenge them to think bigger than that as well.
Now, to tell the truth, this is the first time ever 2 of us giving public presentation together about the museum. And as I rather listen to what you said so far, I'm guessing it's a little bit confusing, no? And don't know what to think kind of state you are. But just be patient as we go on, that you will at least get a hand to it and know what question to ask. Again, I repeat, questions are welcome.
And we're also in this amazing period of growth, not just transformation about who we are as a museum, our identity, our community, our users. We actually use the term users and not visitors, because we hope they come over and over again and they feel comfortable with the space. And we're doubling in size. So we're in the middle of construction right now. We're about to reopen in late September. And it's going to be an amazing new space, one that reconnects the museum with the park itself and creates a much more visible presence. It's a little bit hidden now inside the park, and I think it'll be much more visible exterior on the exterior, as well as bring in the light. We're in a park. And so we're going to have triple filtered natural light galleries, very large open space, where the central corridor actually is a place that even before you go in the exhibitions, you get a sense of the space and the things that you could do, a social space, that you can walk freely in and out from the park.
So, I'm going to really speed up to go this part of museum history. The 1939 World's Fair, the World Exposition, took place in this place. And then where we are housed is the building, built as New York City Pavilion. And we so far occupied, since '72, the opening of the museum, occupied exact half of the building. Now we are taking over entire building. And the next one. And we come back to this thing also later, but at one point, this building functioned as forerunner of UN, United Nations, which is in Manhattan now, but before they had this big, now known as UN building, this exact building functioned as UN Assembly. So the one of the legacy, this building also functioned as, again, Pavilion of World's Fair in 1964-65. That point, the biggest attraction was this panorama of the city of New York, the world, even today, 50 years later, world's largest scale model of a city, architectural model. And this is the jewel of the museum still today. And I have a bitter and a sweet feeling about this as an exhibition person, but that's a fact. And children walks into the museum, go into the entrance of this space. It's 9,000 square feet. I know it's hard for you to imagine in square feet, but it's a size of, is that any good example? I wish you have, but it's big. And children goes, wow!
And I think this history, also these legacies, enable us to think about our role, our historical role, as being a meeting place for the world, through the fairs, through the UN, as well as a place that is intimately tied to urban planning. So the person who built this architectural model was one of the most powerful urban planners in New York City. And so he imagined this architectural model to be a tool for thinking about the development of the city over the course of time. And so now as we house this model, it's the way that young people first start thinking about and understanding the structure of the city, what makes it happen. And we can use it in various ways as we discuss changes to the city over time.
Now I try to go faster as we like to complete our presentation, and do come back for certain questions later, so don't worry. The first part I'm going is that since the 72 starting of the museum, it is late 80s and the early 90s, museums started to have this very distinct characteristics in exhibitions. The one good example is this Contemporary Current series. That 91, 94, 97, this time, that there was no other museums in New York City who take risk of putting a lot of funding into and represent artists from Asia, Latin America, or Africa, or let it be just the art from non-Central, North America, and a Western European mainstream art. There was very, very limited exposure. So museum actually managed, okay, funding is another issue, I know, but the museum actually managed to raise money to represent artists that a vast majority of the art world, even in New York, never heard of. Giving one person project exhibition showcase and present it. And then this is the time of multiculturalism, I'm sure you heard of it. Mid-80s to early 90s, that it was a height of multiculturalism. And those who are previously marginalized section of art world started to have showcase, especially I'm talking about contemporary art. So the question was to give exposure to contemporary art as through museum exhibitions. One of the radical experiments that museum took risk when Guggenheim or Whitney or even New Museum wasn't courageous enough to do so, was when you look at this 93 exhibition, 94, across the Pacific. This is exhibition not only brought contemporary art practice artwork from Korea, South Korea, but also juxtaposed those who are actively working in New York or North America, outside of Korea. I'm sure you heard the word diaspora. So the mixing up and giving body to that representation of art made by South Korean national was done for the first time ever. The same format was applied to 97 exhibition of Indian contemporary art show. Because when you speak of art made of Indian individual, nowadays, that you can't just go to India. Indian people are everywhere. So that try to come up with that comprehensive state of nation and culture. You just cannot ignore scattered populations outside of the nation. And we are in Queens. We are surrounded by numbers and numbers of these diasporic community of many different countries. So that is the particular exhibition Queens Museum devised. This model didn't exist before. The global conceptualism just showed, we are now figuring out, oh my god, we're so behind. Global Conceptualism was a mega show in the Museum of History, 1999, so this is already 14 years ago, but it was 11 curators representing 10 different regions of the world, of the planet, discussing, rediscussing, re-evaluating where the conceptualist practice started in different ways from different cultural, social contexts in different places, as opposed to the accepted notion of conceptualism started from Europe, France, or New York, and everybody copied it. Everybody took it as, we could do that, and Latin America copied it, Japan copied it. We don't think so. That was the exhibition, and this is a Millennium exhibition, looking back, we propose one way of looking back history of 20th century art through the lens of reevaluating conceptualism. But this is also trying to challenge the centralized view of art history being done and led by North America and Western Europe. But also this is, as I explained, and going up to now 2000s international exhibitions or culturally specific exhibitions. Now you see here Greek or Taiwan, yes, Taiwan, and India, and again Central Asia, Middle East. That this is a culturally specific exhibition model, but I am trying to indicate the signal, the transition from multiculturalism to globalization, and then that was also embodied by global conceptualism, not because of the use of the word global, but the conceptual approach to it. Now, one more point I'd like to make is site specificity. Some of you may know that site-specific art to be somewhat connected to physical location or architectural specificity. But I am speaking about the site specificity in expanded notion that include history of site or population, like we're in Queens, we're in this building, and we're in this park, and this is where UN assembly was, and this is where World's Fair happened. All that is the characteristic of site, or what we are surrounded by. And those elements are all considered as site-specific these are turning to artistic inspiration and material for site-specific projects that I oftentimes engage myself as a curator, that sort of become my specialty. But other than one person exhibition that I work with artists, chosen artists, and develop the discourse and do the site visit and then dig up the archive and then talking to people, that's one way of approaching it. These exhibitions right now on the screen, these are mostly the group exhibitions. These are also site-specific in different ways. I will not go one by one now, but I just wanted to introduce that concept. And the next one, I know this is still not large enough, but 2004 was the second Queens International, and this was commissioned to one of the participating artists. Usually what we do is an open call, and an open call to the artist who lives or works in Queens. Do you know what this means? They might have an apartment in Queens because it's cheaper than Brooklyn. And work means that they may have a larger studio here in Queens than Williamsburg or Manhattan because, again, they're cheaper. Or maybe families there for different reasons. And what I did here was I commissioned to the artist to design this map that traces the 48 or something a little less 50 participating artists, where they were born. Starting from there, so that these are the names. I know you can't see. These are the names of the artists, and it starts from where they were born and where they might have been up to the point of ended up being in Queens today. So this was a central piece of the Queens International 2004, and it sort of graphically embodies the essence of Queens International, which represents the fluid population. The population moves around and evolves. They don't just end up landing in Queens and it stays, but say past 5 Queens International, we must have covered 250 to 300 artists. I wonder if 50% still lives or works in Queens. That much of a movement that this borough experiences when it comes to artistic community, as opposed to general population. Also, another very unique program we had is series called Launchpad, and this is artist in residency program, but not in a sense of providing artists studio space to do artwork at the museum. It's not. We engage artists from minimum 3 months to sometime beyond a year and a half long of engagement with us, museum. That artists come to museum or use us as a resource. That because we have this active public event, public program department, that who has a resource, who knows the community, who knows the people, who knows the location, and artists who's interested in developing site-specific projects will come to us and use us as a conduit, and use us, our staff and education department, who has all this programming going outside, or people coming to us for the programming, schools and libraries and all these people that unless otherwise artists alone as an individual have a hard time to reach out to. And we allow that resource to artists to develop site-specific projects. Sometimes it ended up in this one-day project, one-day event. We had 1,500 people showed up in a one-night event. Preparation took a year long, and I'll even show you the preparation site later. That was a special case. But this performance itself lasted 45 minutes. But there's a lot of people involved in making of this exhibition and the event. And a lot of people enjoyed coming in and drinking and experiencing this extravagant naval battle in a Roman style. And ended up in an exhibition after, which is this. This is one example of many other artists who went through this program. But this is engagement that artists are using us, museum, and the people who works in there, and a system we developed to be their resource to develop artwork. The last one, Caribbean Close of the World, was the last show we just closed about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And this was a show in collaboration developed multi-years. I say 9. Well, officially we say 7, and then she said 9, but in fact it was like 11 almost. Okay, so the Caribbean, this exhibition, you may not familiar with these 2 other institutions, El Museo del Barrio, which is in Manhattan. And the other one also in Manhattan in Harlem is Harlem, Studio Museum in Harlem. This exhibition, I wonder how familiar you are all with the concept of Caribbean and what Caribbean really means. The Caribbean was a difficult region to define, politically speaking and historically speaking, geographically speaking. So the project was spearheaded by El Museo del Barrio, who had Cuban curator, knows about the situation of the Caribbean from the inside out. But make a long story short, the point is, the Caribbean had a history of all these nations through the colonialism and a much longer history. African people were imported and exported into the region, and Asian indentured laborers are also frequently trafficked. And this has become a hub of economy and politics and race and culture, people and culture. Everything was fluidly moving into this region, and it made incredible, unique portion of the world. That is the Caribbean, and it happened from 16th century to 20th century into 20th century. And it made sort of a pre-historical model of what the globalization is actually doing just to the entire planet. So this is a prehistoric example from our perspective, that Queens is another, that is symptomatic area that are experiencing globalization, effective fusion of culture and people and society, and what is going to happen. And that is going to be the global phenomena, but we are in Queens experiencing it perhaps one step ahead. And Caribbean was another one, historically, had that experience from different, of course, different socio-historical background. An example of cultural integration, well, not integration, but cultural syncretism, or merengue.
And I think this is the last exhibition-related thing that we're going to talk about, and then we're going to move on to community engagement and public events and how they're connected to the exhibition practice. And this is actually kind of a good example of this, and we'll hear more about Tania Bruguera, the Cuban artist, who has been kind of in commission to do a project, a multi-year project in the neighborhood that we're in called Prerana. That is itself an example of a future idea that she has of a genre of art called useful art in English, or arte útil in Spanish, because that's her native language. So she's set up a set of criteria that she believes that the art of the future, that if it wants to be socially relevant, should strive for. And she wants to create an association of artists who work in this manner. And these proposals include new uses for art within society, challenging the field within which whatever that art intervention operates, whether it's civic life, education, science, etc., be implemented and function in real situations. That is, to move beyond the propositional and to actually create what you're proposing. Replace authors with initiators and spectators with users. 6, to have practical and beneficial outcomes for its users. 7, to pursue sustainability while being adaptable to changing conditions. And 8, and perhaps one of the most important and one of the most contentious, is to reestablish aesthetics as system of transformation of actual users of the project. So these are quite radical proposals, and our show is actually a public research. There's an open call. There are working groups of artists who are going to be part of this association of Arte Útil who are thinking through these proposals. It's not an exhibition, it's a laboratory for something that will be an exhibition in the Van Abbe Museum in the Netherlands. And this picture, as you may, how many of you know about Duchamp's urinal?
I'm sure they know.
So, one of Tania's projects was to return the urinal to the bathroom. So if you go to the Queen's Museum bathroom, you'll see a Duchamp urinal that you can pee in, and has become very useful once again.
It seems like, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on. I'm going to skip through some slides in the interest of time to go through. We said we had community organizers. What do they do besides go to meetings? The idea is to build a network, and what we called a network in our neighborhood, which is Prerana. That's the name of the actual neighborhood. And to build a network of people, not just artists or curators or art-interested people even, but social services, public institutions, ethnic organizations, just community citizens in the neighborhood. And these are the values, and I think it's important to start with the values of why you're engaging people, why you want people to participate in something. So rethinking a museum as a neighbor, as part of a local ecology, as someone who's accountable to the space that they are in, as opposed to a spaceship that lands and visitors from tourists come and it has nothing to do with the neighborhood around it. That the museum creates programs not for the community, but in partnership with the community, through a process of listening. That the community's desires and needs drive collaborations. We don't want to force partnerships just because we think they're a good idea. In community organizing, there's an approach that we call assets-based, which is not to look at everything we don't have. We don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of attention. We can say, what do we have and how do we build from that? How do we actually think of what our assets are, or what are positives in a different way? Cross-silo work, which is to move outside of the realm in which you're comfortable and work in on a daily level. So if I'm working with urban planners around the issue about what they want to do in our park or what they want to build in our park, I have to be comfortable to go and comfortable in engaging in that language and learning that language so that I can talk to planners and architects and planning professionals and city agencies. And to do that, that part of how we choose staff is by those kinds of expertise and backgrounds and not only an interest or knowledge in art. And some of the things that we started with are not necessarily art projects. People said that, you know, the city isn't maintaining the space, they're not picking up the garbage, they're not planting flowers, so we set up a group to do that and to push our elected officials to put pressure on the city to change this situation. There's one area called Corona Plaza, that's the entryway from the train, that just looked awful and everyone was complaining about it. People felt like, if this is the entrance to our neighborhood, what does it say about how the city thinks about us? So we did cleanups, we removed the cars on the streets, we did festivals with local artists and local performers. We brought in healthcare and social service providers to utilize this space, to come out of their offices and engage the public where they are. I think we did this festivals for 3 years, and in those 3 years we signed up 2,000 people for low-cost healthcare, who had screenings for high blood pressure and diabetes and things like that. For us, that is part of the cultural event, that these things happen together and feed off of each other, that create a public, that these things that people might feel are bureaucratic become part of a public life. Of course, that doesn't mean we don't work with artists. We also engage with artists as social researchers that do projects that melt into the space, that engage people who don't normally think about contemporary art. And they're like, this is art, it's not a painting, it's not a sculpture, it's actually a performance, it's an installation inside a business that they go to every day. That makes them question, that engages people, that looks at social dynamics in the space, in the community, looks at popular culture and popular forms and plays with them. So this is an artist who, Sean Leonardo, who uses this popular wrestling called lucha libre, Mexican and Latin American wrestling, and he plays with the character questioning machismo and male dominance in the society and how it is represented in the popular culture, but he does it in a fun and engaging and surprising way. So you can see we actually built a ring in Corona Plaza, and we had this performance in which he loses and humiliates himself, and he engages people even before the event, sitting in the barber shops and everything, and hyping up the event, talking about his character and so forth. It's very subtle, it's funny, it's generous, and it allows people to start thinking about contemporary art in a different way. Let's get the next project in detail, but some of these projects engage communities, so, you know, street vending. This is an activity that happens, new immigrants start new businesses, they sell ice cream or fruits or things, and oftentimes it's illegal. They get fines, tickets, they get harassed. And so this is an artist that made a art vehicle that sells food, and through that had conversations with all the new immigrants who are selling things, what are their problems, and our community organizer could then utilize that information and start working with that set of people and organizing them to fight for their rights. And this is an example. I showed you some things that happen out. We showed you exhibitions, we showed you public projects, public art projects. And how do we start combining things, exhibitions, practice, with that type of work that we're doing in off-site? And this is one example, I think, that shows this. And sometimes it's about responding to crisis. Some things you plan for years and years and years, long-term problems, some things happen. And so when the financial crisis happened, it happened because of these bad loans, housing loans. So all of a sudden, there was this collapse and people couldn't pay their loans anymore, and they were losing their houses. And so there was an artist named Damon Rich, who himself is an urban designer as well as an architect and artist. He wanted to make an exhibition that could be used as a learning center about the financial crisis. That people who were losing their homes or people who were trying to work with them could utilize the data that he collected and present it as an exhibition as a learning tool. And you see this is the architectural model. And one interesting way is, as part of that show, we collected data from organizations, economic justice organizations, about where exactly these foreclosures were happening, because they weren't just happening randomly all over the city. They were happening in neighborhoods where immigrants lived, where black people lived, who had never had access to loans before. And all of a sudden they were being sold these predatory loans, things that had bad terms, that was confusing, that they were cheated. And these were happening in particular neighborhoods, many of them in Queens. And we wanted to make this point, that it wasn't just individual people losing their houses. It was that certain neighborhoods had their wealth removed from them, systematically.
And of course we utilize our panorama, marking up these. This is a pizza box thing, that when you have a large pizza box and then you have this plastic thing standing in the middle so that it won't touch the pizza. It doesn't exist in this country?
It does, yes.
Yes. So okay. So we use that. We painted those in a bright neon pink, and they used it as a marking on the panorama. This was happened to be a Taiwanese intern from our institute in Chicago, who wore this bootie so that it won't hurt the surface of the panorama, and told no, you go there, and he's situating all these things to visualize where these foreclosures are happening. So the panorama is oftentimes incorporated into the exhibition in this way.
This was equally important. So in those neighborhoods where there are a lot of pink triangles, we went out there, we organized neighbors, we created forums where residents could find out the information about what to do if they were in trouble with their house. And they could confront elected officials directly about the situation in their neighborhood and whether they could find services or not. So it wasn't people being brought to the exhibition learning about it, and organizations that do financial literacy utilizing it as a tool, and on the outside, us going to those neighborhoods and providing services as part of the exhibition programming. And we're now at the next phase of our public art commissions. And so one of the projects I mentioned before, Tanya Briguera, her project is actually to create an immigrant movement internationally, starting with this off-site storefront space in Queens, and where immigrant services are offered, where education is offered for new immigrants, and where people go to organize for their rights, whether they're young, undocumented immigrants who are coming up with a campaign for how they become legalized or have access to go to university in the United States. And this space becomes this meeting place where artists, activists, teachers, community members all meet, and where many people's projects are realized through her project.
While Prerana's explaining about this particular project, I'm going to represent you guys' voice of the moment. Why is this art?
Well, I think there's two things. One, which is, this is a challenge around aesthetics that we mentioned before. What if we imagine aesthetics as social beauty, as imagining a future, as conceptual art in a way, that is imagining a future, how we conceive of immigration, the role of the immigrant, in a future that we see, and how do we recreate that in the present as something that could exist, we could change people's minds about. So it is a futurist project in a way. But the aesthetics are in the transformations that happen on the individual level of the people who are using it, and on the community level as people start seeing themselves as leaders and teachers, and not people who just take social services. And I think this is actually an image of the first meeting of the Association of Useful Artists. We've invited people from around the country, around the world. There's Rick Lowe from Project Row Houses in Houston, Mel Chin, you might have heard of. And there were European, Mexican artists also, combined with local politicians, students. The idea that actually we are creating a movement is part of the art. The idea that an artist could create a movement, in some sense, a movement in the art world, a movement in the real world at the same time. And it might fail, and it's better at failing at something worthwhile, perhaps, and coming up with things that can be refined and worked on. that actually the project itself is an experiment, and we as an institution support risk-taking artists and future-thinking artists, just the way that your exhibitions also reframed certain concepts in the art world. If there is a turn towards the social in the art world, how do we actually propose the most radical way, which is not just about creating a nice social experience, everyone is happy, you know, kind of experience, everyone has a meal together and we call it art. I'm not saying that's not art, but if we want to take the social turn to the next level, the most radical level, what would socially engaged art practice look like? I don't know. Tanya doesn't know. But we make some propositions, we involve other artists, we involve people who are not artists in that proposition.
We have a constant discussion among ourselves about this too. How to define this, why this is art. And then we'd like to hear what you think of it.
Oh, yes, we have these. Anybody has
Prizes. With a good question, people get the prizes. But what I have to say, if I have to defend it and justify this because I'm part of the team, is that art will create, with a good portion of artistic creative imagination put into or superimposed upon standing social political issues. And with that good dose, portion of imagination and creativity, how and in what way this can be approached,